This little webinar is called How to Reduce Your Energy Costs by Over 30%. Any energy brokers can uncover huge cost savings by reclassifying your electricity accounts. This is the brilliant one. We've been doing lots of these lately. Basically, when we get a small market or mass market site that meets the threshold to move from an SME into a CNI, we can shift those clients across and drastically reduce their energy costs straight off the bat with no upfront costs to do that. So I just thought I'd make this quick webinar to explain the difference between an SME and a CNI. What does CNI mean? What are network tariffs and network charges? And talk you through this process because it saves a lot of money for a lot of our clients. So what are network tariffs and network charges? What is the difference between an SME and a CNI with regard to electricity? What would a reclassification, why would a reclassification benefit me? And what else can we do to minimize our energy costs, our electricity costs? So look, digging into what are network tariffs and charges, a network service provider is responsible for the infrastructure that transports electricity from your generators to your consumers. So your generators at the moment being both fossil fuel generators, coal-fired power plants, gas power plants, as well as your renewable energy generators such as solar farms and wind farms. So your network service provider is basically responsible for the poles and wires that transports that electricity from that generator through to the consumer itself. Now, there are multiple network service providers in each state and territory. So it's not just a national network service provider. Depending on the state, your territory, and the region you're in, you may have a different network service provider, but essentially they're all doing the same job. Now, these network service providers charge consumers tariffs for building, maintaining, operating, and expanding that network infrastructure. So basically, it's, you've got your poles and wires, they need to be built from new solar farms or new wind farm sites back into the transmission lines. They need to go out from current transformers into new building sites for homes or new buildings, new businesses going up. And basically, there's a cost involved in maintaining that infrastructure and obviously building new infrastructure as well. So these charges need to be passed through to the consumer by the retailer rather than being charged directly from the network service provider. And these charges can appear on your electricity bill. They're certainly contained within your electricity bill, but not all bills, electricity bills, will actually show you what those network service provider charges are. Now, these charges vary by state and by region, also by the connection type, whether you're a business or a residential site, and then again, whether you're a small versus a large business. So it's good to understand what network tariffs and network charges are, because that sort of leads into our next section of the webinar about the difference between an SME and a CNI. So basically, SME is small to medium enterprise, small business, and CNI is commercial and industrial. That's what the abbreviations are. Now, what classifies as SME? Typically, you spend between $2,000 to $30,000 per year. Your annual usage, which is the most important one, is around 10 to 100 megawatt hours a year, or 100,000 kilowatt hours per year. An example of a standard SME site would be a small office, shops, cafes, and workshops. Now, the tariffs usually on bundled retail plans, sometimes on small business network tariffs. I'll explain that a little more in a minute. And then when you're contracting on an SME side, it's often less formal with shorter contract periods and simple to change retailers annually. Now, these in the SME market, different retailers can put out different bonuses for joining up with them at certain periods of the year. They can have discounts, they can have incentives for people who want to change retailers, and that can be done fairly simply in the SME market. Now, this is what your basic SME bill might look like. You've got, very simply, a peak usage charge at a flat rate and a supply charge at a flat rate. Very basic, very little on that bill But what's good to note is that all of those network charges that I briefly described before are bundled into your usage charge and your supply charge. So the charges are still there. It's just all bundled into one. Now, briefly describing a CNI customer, typically spend is 30,000 a year plus, can exceed a million, can far exceed a million. There is no cap. Annual usage, your threshold, generally speaking, nationally is over 100 megawatt hours. Some states are different. Some states are higher, some states are lower. Examples, obviously, your large warehouses, schools, hotels, factories and shopping centres. So your far larger sites, larger energy users. And your tariffs are usually on demand-based network tariffs, and I'll show you what that looks like on a bill example in a minute. And when contracting, you're contracted via a competitive tender process, generally wholesale pass-through options, demand response, and tailored risk strategy. So there's a whole lot more complexity, but a whole lot more flexibility at the same time when you're contracting a CNI, and there are added benefits to that as well that we'll touch on a bit later. So this is what a CNI bill might look like, depending on your retailer. You have your peak and off-peak charges. Depending on your state, it might be peak, shoulder, and off-peak, but most generally peak and off-peak. It's billed at a flat rate, yes, but then you also have all these unbundled charges in there, which are all of your network charges. So this is the distribution and transmission line charges that I touched on earlier. These are all passed through at cost. So the retailer is being charged by the network service provider for these charges. They're passed through to the consumer at cost, but they're displayed on the bill so you can actually see how much those charges are and whether the tariff that you're on is suitable for the site you're on. They also include regulated environmental and metering charges in these unbundled CNI bills. And equally, you can see the difference between what your energy charges actually are versus all your other charges as a percentage of your bill. So you can see in this particular example, network charges make up 25% of your overall bill. Now, in some circumstances, network charges are actually far larger than energy charges. It just depends on how business is using energy, whether there's a high peak at certain periods of the day in volume for a short period of time, or whether your load is unpredictable. Whether you have solar or not can often change your network charges as well. So there are ways to minimize your network charges, which SME clients generally don't have that ability to do so. So the key difference in summary, usage volume, SMEs are low to medium volume, CNIs your higher energy users. Your retail options, SME generally bundled only, so you can't actually see what your other environmental, regulatory, and network charges are. They're all bundled into one. Your network charges, simpler, flat or time of use, and then with the CNI, the demand-based and a bit complex. Contract flexibility, limited flexibility with the SMEs, but with the CNI, there's quite a lot of flexibility around how you want to contract your energy. And then your management approach, generally SME set and forget. You choose a lowest cost retailer in the market. With your CNI, you can factor in a more strategic procurement strategy, which is where energy brokers come into the fray. A case study to explain the benefits of a reclassification from an SME to a CNI. This is a brilliant site. We've been doing a lot of these lately where the customer is meeting the minimum threshold to move into the CNI bracket. So in this case, this customer's on an SME rate, billed at 36 cents per kilowatt hour, daily supply charge $1.65 a day, very simple, annual consumption above that 100,000 kilowatt hours threshold to move into CNI, and their annual bill is around that $40,000 at the moment. And there's an example of what that bill looks like. Once we restructured and shifted this client into a CNI classification, we negotiated their energy rates, peak and off-peak usage. So 8.5 cents and 11 cents for peak and off-peak. A huge discount from your bundled general usage charges when they were an SME. of 35 cents, nearly 36. There are obviously all of your regulated demand and metering charges included on top of that, but the outcome was $26,000, $26,500 annual cost for this customer and a percentage saving of 34%. So these are the sort of savings you can expect when you find the right site at the right volume and a right point in time to negotiate great rates from our panel of retailers. When would a reclassification to CNI benefit me? First and foremost, when the usage is large enough, we obviously need to meet that threshold. But when you can meet that threshold, the benefits come via competitive tendering process for your rates rather than just choosing the lowest cost rates out there. You can get in a competitive tender with a panel of retailers and have them compete and negotiate on the best rate in the market at the time. And obviously all the wholesale pass-through options on your billing. And it can lower your retail component of the bundled SME rates considerably. So that's the energy charges I touched on earlier. It lowers that 35 cents down to 10 to 15, bringing on considerable savings as long as your demand is low enough. Other benefits are when network charges can be optimized. So CNI often move to demand-based network tariffs. That's when you see your dollars per kVA per month in demand charges. And I might have to make a separate webinar explaining that in a bit more depth. But you can optimize those demand charges. If you have a flat or predictable load or a low peak demand relative to total usage, moving to the CNI demand-based billing also brings you a significant saving moving from an SME. Other benefits include the flexibility and risk management can create savings. So with a CNI, you can contract up to 5 years. So if we're in a great time in the cycle of energy rates, we're in a trough, rates are low, you can actually lock in for as long as possible, which is up to 5 years in contract terms. And those rates are then locked in for that period. Obviously timing the market for forward contracting. So right now we're in a good time in the energy market, and we've been locking in our CNI clients for as long as we possibly can. Load management, demand response participation. So load management, basically, if we can reduce your peak demand, which is shown on your bill, and it happens at a 5-minute increment in the highest period of your month, we can actually focus on that and try and reduce that demand, which brings your network charges down considerably. And finally, you've got more negotiating power with your retailers. So that's the competitive tender situation that I mentioned earlier. How it saves money. So tendered energy rates, lower megawatt hour pricing, lower network charges with regard to your demand tariffs, forward contracting, so lock in when prices are low, demand management, so you can reduce your demand charges, and then unbundling. So you can often identify and fix hidden cost drivers in your electricity. So if you didn't realize that your demand profile is relatively low, you'll actually see that on your unbundled bills. Or if it's particularly high, we can also do a tariff review and optimize your tariff based on what your actual consumption is. So when considering a reclassification, it's important to note you can only do that every 12 months if in fact you're eligible to change a tariff. And reclassification doesn't always help. So it's always good to have a broker in your court when looking at a reclassification. Here's a reclassification matrix, which might be useful. So I might put this on the website, but it'll give prospective SME customers out there an idea of where they sit at the moment and whether they might be able to move into the CNI bracket. But this is a terrific matrix to consider. Hope that's been helpful, and I look forward to chatting to you all soon.